Rushdie, I think we have this is a little bit need to be adjusted. Rushdie. Okay. Making it. First of all, it's always good to see you guys on Friday, and today, Friday Night Lights is an interesting topic or topics, but all related to something we call it hard decisions. No doubt that in our life we always have tough decisions to make and hard decisions to take and to commit ourselves to. And hard decisions are usually decisions that have a long-term effect, consequences. Also, hard decisions, it's something not easy to do. Also, it can affect you and many people around you. And you will see some examples of these hard decisions that we will cover today. But I'm very happy to have in this panel with me people who deal with hard decisions maybe every day in their life, and they help people to make these hard decisions. So on my right hand side, Sheikh Ibrahim, Jazakallah Khair, you all know him. But also I have Dr. Maryam Sultan, who is dealing with people who help people to rehabilitate. People, especially I think with brain injury, you told me. Yeah. So she deals with a lot of these hard decisions to be made in every day in your life for you, for the family. But before I jump into some of these cases, I just want to say, Sheikh Ibrahim, mashallah, منور اليوم.
الله ينور.
جزاك الله فيك. And هو mashallah looks very shining today. Jazakallah khair. Alhamdulillah.
Always.
No, oh my God. Okay. I love the confidence. Okay. Always. They said there is a thin hair between confidence and arrogance. It's called humility, which is he is very down to earth person. So I know this confidence, nothing else. Alhamdulillah. If you guys can, let's start with the audience. What's the hardest decision can a person make? Let's see what the audience think. What's you thinking the hardest decision? Maybe you made, maybe you have some friends made. What do you think the hardest decision that a person can make? Let's see. I'm sorry, raise your hand so I know who was talking. Yes? Who to marry? That's a very hard decision. Who's to marry? Very good. Excellent. What else? Yes? I think one of the hardest decisions to make is to change your religion. Okay? It's a very hard decision to make. Okay? Very good. What else? Anybody else? What do you think is the hardest decision, Sheikh Ibrahim?
I would say that anything related to family is hard. It puts you, because it really affects you personally, and it affects people whom you love a lot. And sometimes you have to choose things that are the best for them, and that could be very hard.
Okay, so family. What's the hardest decision you think? Maria. Victoria.
So I actually agree. Anything kind of, I think any decision related to somebody that you love, and anybody that's kind of not yourself. I think it's easier to make decisions about ourselves than to make decisions for our loved ones. So I guess personally, in work, so decisions about.
Maybe you can bring closer.
Higher.
I'm sorry, there is people talking. I can hear the talk. So maybe sisters in the back or brothers. I'm not sure who's talking. But whoever talking to each other, I can hear half of your conversation. So it's a private. I know most of it now. Yes.
So I think the hardest decision I've seen people have to make is the decision to stop treatment, medical treatment for their family members. So I've, witnessed it with, patients being treated at the hospitals, and the anguish that families have in making this decision for their family member is the hardest thing I've ever seen somebody kind of have to decide on.
Excellent. So she's saying that the hardest decision ever to make has to do with life and death. Mm-hmm. That's just very hard decision. 100% I agree. Yes, you were saying something earlier, sorry. No. Divorce. Yeah, family. Shabreen put it perfectly. Okay, so I think we all agree that anything has to do with life and death is a very hard decision. That's right? Mm-hmm. You guys agree? Not really? You agree? Yes. Omar, you agree? Okay, excellent. So let's start with this. If you're in a situation where there is a decision to be made about should I continue my treatment or not? I'm sure you dealt with cases like this. A lot of time we dealt with cases like this, where family will come and say, Sheikh, my father is in life support. My father's treatment is, stage 4 cancer. And you know what? There is no any medical treatment for this stage or this type of cancer at this point. What should I do? Should I continue? What do you think is the state of mind of the person who basically asking this question, or the person who has to make it on behalf of someone else? And I think if you do it on behalf of someone else, it's even more difficult than you to make that decision for yourself. So when you get like that, what do you do as a physician when somebody that come turn to you? How you deal with that?
So the first thing that we do is we try to probe a little bit and see if the patient ever expressed to their family what their wishes at the end of life would be. And this is me kind of encouraging everybody to go to your family members and try to have these conversations. So, has that patient ever said something like, I would never want to live if such and such and such? And so that's kind of what we do in the hospital realm. And then as a Muslim, I think there has been a little bit of talk kind of more recently amongst Muslim, practicing Muslim physicians and scholars in the area about what is a life worth living for a Muslim, or what is a life not worth living for a Muslim. And then the thought goes back to what were we created for, right? And so we have very concrete evidences that we were created to worship Allah. So the kind of defining idea is that if a person can no longer do that, is no longer in a state of mind where they can worship, they don't necessarily need to be standing up for salah, but that their mind is working properly enough to be able to make adhkar or to understand who Allah is in their life still, then perhaps that's a life that no longer needs to go on. And so in practical terms, right, that would be a person whose brain is just completely not functioning anymore. And then in terms of illness, of a kind of chronic terminal illness that we have no cure for, or that even if we do treat it, is still going to result in significant debility and an inability to, live a life that is not necessarily a normal life, but a life that is a bit purposeful, or that is a stable life. Then in that case, that treatment would not need to go on. And so I think it's actually interesting. A lot of the research in the field goes back to fiqhi determinations that came about from criminal cases. So I'm sure you can expound on this, Sheikh, but the idea of an unstable life, right? Al-hayat ghayru mustaqirra, of, in the case of a murder, let's say somebody inflicts a mortal wound on a person, and the guy is lying, bleeding out, and he will eventually die from that wound, but then somebody else comes and cuts off his head. So who is culpable? And we think about that similarly in the case of an illness that is going to take the life of a person, that is terminal, right? That we cannot cure. And then a patient who has this illness that is going to take their life and then develops a secondary illness. Let's say they have late stage brain cancer and then develop a pneumonia. Do we need to treat that pneumonia? We can cure the pneumonia, right? But they're still going to be left with that debilitating illness that is going to take their life very soon. And so the overarching idea is that treating them for their pneumonia is still going to give them some adverse effects from coming into the hospital, from getting an IV, from all of the medical interventions we're going to do, that perhaps then putting all of that to the side and allowing the natural progression of their disease to go about, that we as Muslim physicians are not obligated to treat that secondary disease that came about. So
Let's just hold on. Because you said something that can be misunderstood,
Sure.
and I'm 100% sure you don't mean that.
Sure.
When you said when the brain is not function, or the person's, which means like the brain functioning, basically it means everything in your body, because but your thing of your body is controlled by your brain.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think she means, or anyone will ever mean, if somebody can't use his brain in a sense, can't think, can be, understand, comprehend, and things of that nature, it doesn't mean that this person's life to be ended or to be let go. That's not what is meant. It meant like somebody who's brain dead. Somebody can't basically make it. Because when the brain is not functioning, that means your liver, your kidney, doesn't mean like your aql or your ability to comprehend. So that's just comment, just because that's not what it intend. Because this crazy idea of somebody insane should be just put to death, kind of.
No,
that's
not
we're not talking about that.
Of putting to death, but the idea of treating that.
Yes, no, but even if somebody in, let's say somebody has a mental health issues.
Sure, that's totally different. 100%.
That's just
psychiatric and all of that is completely different from.
Okay, I just want to make sure that nobody misunderstands what has been said.
I think she means in vegetative state. The person is brain dead, for example.
So,
Go ahead.
Those are right. So two very different things. So brain death means that the entire brain is not functioning. That were we to take away the respirator and take away the medications we're giving the patient to make their heart pump, everything would stop, right? So we are keeping their lungs working and keeping their heart pumping completely on scientific, advancement. And if we take that away, they are dead. So brain death is a prognostic indicator of complete death.
Yep. So take to the second point, which is mentioned. There is something has to be, obviously if somebody wounded and somebody come and kill him, we'll kill that person who's kill him. That's haram, period. There's no two opinions about it among the fuqaha. So we have to differentiate between two things. One, ending somebody's life, which is they call it mercy killing. That's one thing, okay? And the other thing is when I'm not providing that external factor that can sustain this life, which is medications, which is resuscitations for the heart, whatever, operation that you do. In the old days, they used the word ilaj or tib or medicine to refer to all these things together, okay? So they said in the old days of fiqh, in this case, do I have to provide medicine for such person? They meant by medicine any form, anything that's outside that can help to sustain the life of that person, okay? So we make sure to take out what we all agree upon, which is the issue of we're not talking about ending that person's life.
No, not at all.
Yeah, so that's agreed upon, haram, not allowed. We start the next point. The next point is What if somebody in the state that you just heard described, someone who is to that level of scientifically, we don't know that ever this person can basically recover. Okay. In this case, that's the case that we talk about, correct?
Correct.
Go ahead.
So I just wanted to also say one thing, that we do have rulings on the seeking of medical treatment Islamically, right? And all kind of generally we deem it permissible, but there are cases in which it becomes obligatory. And the scholars have defined those as cases in which a cure is certain and not using that cure will result in either death or severe damage to an organ or a limb. And the other is contagion, right? So if a patient has tuberculosis and will transmit that to the entire community, that person must be treated Islamically, and you will find that those Islamic rulings are 100% mirrored in secular medical treatment. In the case of the person, right?
Right, hold on. That's not something agreed upon.
By the scholars? No,
yes.
it's not, yeah.
So even these cases is not agreed upon. But what agreed upon, for example, if somebody has contagious disease, is not allowed to be mixing with people. But if that person chooses to stay by himself until he survived or died, he did not commit sin according to many scholars. Medication, seeking medication in general, the majority of the Muslim jurists believe it is permissible. And that's a very smart way to start the conversation, so you understand where we're coming from. Is it obligatory to seek it? Like, I would be sinful if I don't seek it? The majority said it is permissible. Some scholars said no. Seeking medicine sometimes can be obligatory, like the cases like you just heard. And some of them are agreed upon. The most agreed upon, if it is something that dysfunctional you have, and if you get this medication, it will allow you to function again, so you'll be able to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Shaykh ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, among the scholars whose modern day said, in this case it became obligatory for you to do that, to take that medication, so you'll be able to function and to be able to support your family, and it is something capable of you, and you are capable of offering that money, and you know what's the medicine there. Also, if it is something that will save the life for sure, like somebody, for example, his heart stopped, and if you basically shock the person, you can resuscitate the person, you bring him to life. It became obligatory on the nurse or the doctor who present at this moment, obligatory to do that, because that will bring him to life, at least to try, okay, to save that person's life. Unless that this person has a situation, which is, you heard earlier, that basically in a no return point, according to what we know from knowledge. Yes?
And so then the case of a person who, I think the question was,
So how do you process this? Okay, we identify the case, somebody comes to you, tell you, Doctora, I don't have any hope to be recovered. What kind of, do you just tell them, hey, khalas, take off the, don't try to seek treatment or experimental drugs, or, and if somebody asks you, why would you give this advice? Why would you give this advice to someone? Let me try.
So absolutely, I would never, say, don't do this. I would weigh the risk and benefit, right? And so we want to minimize harm to the extent that we can. So if a patient, let's say, and we get these patients all the time, at the hospital, who have these advanced brain cancers, but come to our rehabilitation hospital in order to get strong enough, or more as independent as possible, so that they can spend the rest of their days at home. And they inevitably will develop a problem when they're with us. and will go back to their other hospital. And it is exceedingly rare for them to ever return to us, right? So that's a patient who will pass away in the hospital under treatment. So if a patient, would come to me and say, I am certainly, this is my terminal illness, there is no cure, what should I do? I would certainly recommend that they, if they can find any experimental treatments that have, whose side effects will not overwhelm them, then I would recommend that they go ahead and do that.
Such things exist?
If they do, but it's totally up to the person. It's fine for them to seek that treatment, but it's also fine for them if it does not exist. If there's no certainty that this treatment is going to cure them, it's fine for them to also forego it.
Actually, medicine is not about curing, that's right.
Sometimes it is.
And
Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's, keeping things where they need to be to continue life.
yeah, it's about reducing the pain,
Right.
reducing the,
Right.
benefiting a little bit.
The quality of life of the
Yeah.
patient.
Right.
So, but if there is nothing like that, you will spend the rest of your life vomiting, spend the rest of
Exactly.
painful and
Exactly.
very severe pain. In this case, what would you say to them?
In that case, if that's what's going to happen if they seek treatment, then I would recommend that they stay away from that in order to maximize the quality of the rest of their time on earth. But I do think that it's important as Muslims for us. A lot of times, doctors will ask towards the end of life, what for you, is a life that's not worth living. And I think it is important for us to understand that our worth in our life, right, is the worship of Allah. Like that's our top priority. And so to keep that in mind, that we wouldn't want anything that would take away from that. And that includes kind of the potential adverse effects of various treatments.
Shabrahim, what do you do when somebody asks you this question? We live in a medical area, so I'm sure you get this question.
Well, definitely, if there's no there's no return to.
He came to you, told Dr.
You come to a
Dr.
point where-
Mariam told me there is no hope. There is way more side effect than good. My recommendation is not to go through that experiments because I've seen it, I've witnessed it. Maybe you should start thinking about what's kind of life worth living for. So he came now to the Sheikh to ask, what do you say to people like that?
In this case, I would make it where he'll understand that he is in a situation now where he needs to transition to the next life in the best form, in the way that he should, maximizing his good deeds, doing the things that he needs to do, closing his accounts. What I mean, closing his accounts with, if he has debts, if he has problems that he has family that he needs to reconnect with them, to make his life as comfortable as possible, where he can worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and give him, hope in the hereafter, give him, the understanding of our purpose in life and how things transition to the next life, and eventually I will tell him, life and death is in the hands of Allah, but
Make sure you write too well.
Yeah, exactly.
What about the family? If the family come and ask you, and she said to you, am I killing my son? I'm killing my husband. I'm putting my parents to death. What would you say?
Well, I mean, these are extreme cases. I mean, this
it's not
expression
extreme.
I understand.
Not
but
if I unplug the machine,
I
my
would tell
dad will
them-
die.
I would tell them, okay, there's a big difference between someone actively trying to end someone's life actively,
Okay.
and someone who's not seeking the extra measures that are not helping.
Beautiful.
Actually.
So number one, I want everybody to understand that by not offering that treatment, you're not killing the person. Because sometimes people think that. Number one, this is very important to understand. You're not killing someone.
You're not,
That's
euthani-
not
you're
mercy
not
killing.
euthanizing them.
Yeah,
No.
that's number one. Number two, what else you tell them?
Well, I tell them basically it is okay, the prognosis is negative. It's not really, it's not looking good. But at the same time, this is not the end of the person's purpose in life, or that he should really, they should look at the larger picture, that we as Muslims, we believe in the hereafter, we believe in life after death, we believe in the grave period of time, life, where we, al-barzakh, where we need to do the things that we can help our prognosis actually in the hereafter be better, our situation be better. And for the family is that we don't make them lose hope, because after all, try to spend as much as, good quality time with your loved one. Try to reconnect with them. Try to strengthen the relationship. Try to, invest in loving them. Try to make it up for them. A lot of people actually handle grief in a way where it is counterproductive. We as Muslims, we handle grief as it is a ni'mah from Allah, actually. It is a way where we can...
So one of the things that's important to tell to the family, the second point I understand, is to talk to them about the akhirah, coming to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. SubhanAllah, yani, man ahabba liqa Allah, ahabba Allah liqa. When you love to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah loves to meet you. It's so important to understand whenever you are in the situation of loved one, that the believers, when they go to Allah, they have a better life than what you have here. There's no doubt Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be more merciful than any one of us. So we have that yaqeen, husn al-dhan billah. The ulama rahimahullah talk about husn al-dhan, to only think good of what Allah have for you, in particular at this point, the point of death. Mujmi'een al-ulama, that this is a focus point, to have great husn al-dhan billah in the time of your death. Also, one thing that I noticed, I asked myself these questions with my own father when he was in life support. He paralyzed for a while. He had multiple, strokes in his brain, rahimahullah. And it reached to the point, like what he said, it's just pointless. And my brothers, talking to my brothers, so when they asked me, I asked myself a question. I said, is it about me or it is about my father? Because what I found so many times when people in this situation, if you dig deep, it's really about me, not about the patient. It's about me, want him to be around me, want to see him. I don't want to lose him. And I think that's became sometimes selfish.
That's a good point.
But if you think how much this person is suffering, and I see many doctors here, correct me if I'm wrong, correct me loud, okay? Don't think the life support is the patient is breathing so smoothly and just happy, being in morphine or whatever. He really relaxing. No, it is so hard. It's so painful. That's right, Doctor? Omar, Doctor? Yeah, it is not an easy thing. So if you really think about the pain that they have, and you witness that in your work.
Yeah.
The psychological pain and the physical pain. And have Dr. Shalabi also back there. That's right, Doctor. It's not an easy thing to be in that position. We have to think about what they're going through. Also the financial burden that sometimes created hundreds of thousands of dollars that is accumulated. I'm not being materialistic, but I'm being practical here. So sometimes we have to think about this person. And I give you another example. A sister, all her life muhajjaba, all her life covered, all mashallah, never been seen by someone. And she reached that level of vegetation states, or in that level. Would she, in your opinion, in her hospital will be always covered, will not be exposed? No way.
It's not
It's
possible.
impossible.
It's not easy.
Impossible.
It's not easy, no.
Why would you let someone live all their life by certain code of moral? You're exposed to something that they in their lifetime hated the most or don't want it. Yes, I know if it's a period of time and surgery cover, yes, I understand that. But that's years like this.
And the dignity of the
Dignity of
patient,
the
yeah.
person. So, and I asked myself all these questions. I was thinking about it all night. I said, Waleed, is it about you or it's about your dad? And I know that it is about him.
Mhm.
And I said to my brother, just leave it to the hand of Allah. I don't want to put any life support in him. If he survives, alhamdulillah. If he doesn't survive, alhamdulillah. 20 minutes. Dying a very smooth, alhamdulillah. Why? And I until today, I think even some one of my brothers was not happy with it. But later on, he came and he thanked me. Yeah. Just for the honesty, because also it's important to show you all the sides. There is a counter argument to some of the points that we mentioned here, especially if you say it's about him worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not. There is a counter argument some ulama have. They said if he stayed in that life support or he stayed in that state, he still get the reward of all the good deeds that this person used to do. Like, even if you are in that state, you're still in a state of active worship, even if you would purposely, you cannot yourself do it. So all the salawat, it will be count for you, all the zakat, all the qiraat al-Quran, all the tasbih, all the tahmid, because the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, you get all the reward of the thing that you used to do when you were healthy. Also, sickness and suffering is a form of purification and raising the level. And that led, some of the scholars like Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah said, he was against the issue of, ending the life if there is still a mean to sustain it. If there is a mean to sustain it, even if it is sustained in a way that it is based on life support and things of that nature. But not the majority of the fuqaha. And Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah also said it is permissible. He was not very strict about it. Or at least you have a couple of different positions. But listen, when Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah himself had a cancer and he was brought to Boston, I went and I visited him in Boston. And he asked the doctors, that cancer treatment that you have, the chemotherapy, would that cure me? He said, no, you are too advanced. He said, thank you. And he never took the medicine. He went back to Arabia and he never took because they told him it's going to make you vomit, it's going to make you not able to function, lose your hair, And he said, no, I will go back, whatever left of my life, I would rather to spend the rest of my life able to communicate and to teach and instead of spending the last year in hospital in and out, I would spend it with my students. And he died, rahimahullah. The last day he was actually teaching in the haram, laying down while the microphone next to him, and for about 15-20 minutes, and after that taken to the hospital, and he died before Fajr, rahimahullah ta'ala. So I just also want you to be aware. So even if we say, we're not rushing here, but at one point you have to make that decision. At one point you have to make that decision. And I want you not to feel guilty, not to feel haram, not to feel wrong.
I think the
Yes.
The decision has been made so difficult in our age because of how much medical advancement we have. So the line between, living and healing versus actively dying has become very blurred. It's hard for even physicians, and so I can imagine, everybody in the community to know when a person has moved into that phase where they are dying, versus we're still treating them. And so I like to kind of phrase it to people that are we prolonging life or are we prolonging death and the dying process? Are we treating
That's a
something?
good point.
Are we healing something? Will we actually bring about a positive change, or are we just prolonging their death? And I
Very good.
I also don't think that Sheikh Walid, with the whole pulling the plug thing, that's a whole, I think, other idea. But all of this is talking about starting new treatments, not really taking things away. So a person, let's say who has this late stage cancer, maybe it's throat cancer, they can no longer eat, right? It becomes a question of then, do we give them food via a feeding tube? Is this going to be treatment for them, or is it just going to be feeding them? And trying to think about all of these medical interventions that we'll throw at them. Is it treating them? Is it helping them? Or is it just allowing their dying process to last longer? So I think it's a good way to think about it.
But that goes into, I read your research. It goes into, are we allowed to starve them? If they have, let's say, what do you call it? Irreparable
Like a
situation
terminal
where
illness,
they have a throat cancer and they can't really eat normally. But if they have no throat cancer, their throat is okay, they could eat normally.
Mm-hmm.
And now you have to use a feeding tube. Now, if there's no hope in them recovering at all, are we allowed to starve them?
Right.
I don't think you ask her you're allowed to starve them. She's not a
what
mufti, but
Right.
You ask her about, from a medical perspective, is that what you do?
Are we starving them?
Are we
I think is
starving
the better question.
Okay. That's the question.
So what's interesting is that patients at the end of their life actually don't feel thirst and they don't feel hunger. So a story about my own grandmother, Allah yarhamha, she passed away in her early 90s, mashallah. She had a beautiful life. And my father was serving her at the end of her life, and she stopped drinking, and she stopped eating. And he called me one day, and he said, should I take her to the hospital? She's not drinking anymore. And so I explained to him that patients at the end of their lives just don't feel thirst. Their body no longer needs it. And when we pump them full of fluids, their body is not taking it in the way we take in fluids, right? It's not passing through their bladder and coming out normally. It goes all over their body and they start to swell up, and it really causes more harm than good. And so I, really motivated him to leave her at home and allow her, to just pass naturally. And, mashallah, she had the most beautiful passing. She was remembering Allah the whole time with her head in her son's lap. And we can all hope for a death like that. And so no, usually these patients who are dying, they do not need food. They're not starving.
I wish for a better death, but I mean.
I know.
Yeah.
They're not starving, and they're not thirsty. So no, we typically, if they're actually in the dying process, do not need to do those interventions.
Very good. There is a doctor told me something so interesting. I'm not sure what you think about that. He said, Sheikh, what's going on with the Muslims? Why non-Muslims are much braver when it comes to death than Muslims? And he said, as a doctor, I'm telling you, Sheikh Walid, so many of my patients, when they're non-Muslims, I tell them, hey, according to what we know, you have 6 months. Thank you very much. I'll go and spend the rest of my life with whatever life he wants. If it's a church, if it's a nature, if it's a family, go to Colorado, go to Austin, go to Summi. And he said different things I hear. And they go. And they're ready for it. I'm getting ready for that. He said for Muslim, they holding into this dunya in a way that as if there is no akhirah.
Wow.
And he told me it is so hard for me to process this. Is that description kind of exaggerating or correct?
No, it's not. It's actually correct. And it's unfortunate, I feel. So when I was a first-year resident, right, I had just finished medical school, my first year as a quote-unquote doctor, and I was in the ICU, and there was a patient there who had been there for months, and he was declared brain dead multiple times. But the family refused to withdraw, I wouldn't even call it life support at this point, the ventilator and the medications to keep his heart pumping. He was not Muslim, he was polytheistic religion. And I had a very crass ICU doctor as my superior, and I kind of made the comment of, why would the family do this to him? He was literally decomposing in the ICU. The ethics board of the hospital was involved trying to get him out. And so I said, why would his family do this to him? And my attending said, this is what your people do all the time.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that's what actually got me interested in this whole topic, because I didn't know anything about it Islamically at the time, but I just told him, no, this is not this is not what Islam says. And so then, I started to look it up. But yeah, I think we do see that. And I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding kind of behind it in our community.
Yes. One thing that this year at AMJA, Simply Muslim Jurists in North America, we do have some nawazil related to medical issues. And one of the issues that we want to talk and educate imams about it around the United States is this issue. And we have issued fatwa before about the life support and how we deal with it. And subhanAllah, it's interesting, Al-Qarafi rahimahullah, which is scholars like about 800 years ago, he talked about something called قال الحياة المستعارة كالعدم. A borrowed life is like no life. He said, if you imagine that your life depends on something external, he said, that's not a life.
Wow. And
if you bring something external to sustain your life, he said, that's not a life. It's like nothing. So and he built the whole argue that it is something that can be dismissed or something that you don't have to take it to sustain life. Life should be sustained from within the body. But then again, go to the whole idea, promise of medicine being, or treatments being something that it is in general permissible. طيب. Before we move out from this idea, I want to say something, and maybe you guys both can comment on it. One doctor once told me something that's it really hits me hard, and it's still in my head. He said, Waleed, for us as Muslim, we should not think about, we're not trying to, it's not about for you to live longer, because your life is determined when you're going to live, when you're determined. But what you need to think about more is what kind of quality of life you will have for whatever years left for you. Like, for example, when we say exercise, when you say diet, when you say do this, do that, it's not about, or medicate, it's not about really how long longer you can live, or you can delay your death or cheat your death. It's about what quality of life that you have. You're going to die 10 years. But what's more important, how you will die. Is that something that you want to reflect upon, since you have seen examples, so community be aware of that?
Yes, so definitely. I think, so quality of life and maintaining a good life, so important, and there are things that we can do in our youth that will translate, into our old age, certainly. So trying to keep our bodies as strong and healthy as they can be when we're young will help us when we're old.
You hear that, young guys? Who eating day and night smash burger and,
Yes, fruits and vegetables are good. But I think thinking about how we would want our last days to pass is important, and is, I think, something to communicate. So the idea of medicalized dying, I think, has become the norm, in that many people are passing, in the hospital, surrounded by machines and things like that, and trying to transition that back to the home as much as we can. And I know that there are some conditions where doctors really work to get their patients home to spend their last days. And so I think just being kind of cognizant of that as our loved ones are going through what they're going through, that if we cannot pass away in the best of ways, then passing around our loved ones in our own home is I think is a good option.
Good. I want to talk about something closer to this, but before I move to the next point, anybody in the audience would like to make a point in regard to this issue? Yeah, go ahead. I think he's the first one. He raised his hand. So I'll take you, then take Dr. Tariq, then Dr. Mustafa. Yeah.
Two quick questions. The first one is there a difference between brain dead and being in a coma? Second question is, I know some families they're actually not coma, right? And the wife got to this state where she was in coma, and they decided to keep her on the machine. And she woke up a year later, and then she lived for another 10 years, and then she passed. So I guess the question is it israf to keep your family on this kind of situation?
Can you just repeat the question so people in the online hear the
Sure.
question?
The question is brain death the same as a coma? And the brother has a family member who was diagnosed as being in a coma, and 1 year later woke up and continued to live for 5 or 6 years afterwards. So, is it?
Sometimes those people also put in life support, then go back to life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is it kind of israf or going over the top to keep our family members on life support, for that amount of time? So number one, brain death is not the same as a coma. In brain death, the entire brain has stopped functioning. There's a whole exam that goes into it where we check for reflexes in the part of the brain that sustains life, that keeps our heart and lungs pumping. And we check to see if the patient will take a breath on their own. This whole exam is done while making sure that they're not on any sedatives, that they don't have an infection. There are very strict criteria that have to be met in order to diagnose a person as brain dead. Coma, on the other hand, is a form of kind of like a brain injury. So there's a spectrum of this, right? So there's a minimally conscious state where a patient is still getting stimulus and kind of understanding it, and also giving us some output to show that they're taking in a stimulus and able to give some purposeful movement or some purposeful noise. So that's minimally conscious state. And then we have a vegetative state, which really interesting that you said 12 months, because in the medical literature, a vegetative state can persist. So in a patient who has had a stroke, we typically give them until 3 months from the time their vegetative state started, and then at the 3-month marker, we will deem them to be in a persistent vegetative state where we don't expect them to come out. But this is a person who their brain is generally functioning otherwise, but they're just not giving us any signs that they're receiving input or giving any purposeful movement. For a patient who's had a traumatic brain injury, like a car accident, we actually give them 12 months to declare themselves to actually come out of that vegetative state. If at the 12-month mark they don't come out, then we deem them persistent, to be in a persistent vegetative state. So absolutely, these patients do recover. We have an entire program at the rehab hospital where I work called a Disorders of Consciousness program, where these patients come in.
No, Rushdie, sorry.
Come in and seem to not be perceiving anything of the outside world, and to not be giving us any sign of that perception. But then eventually, with the proper treatments and the proper therapies, they actually do kind of break through. Certainly age plays a factor. The younger the patient, the better their recovery and the more likely that they will break through. The severity of their brain injury, is certainly a factor. But I'm a huge proponent of giving these patients a chance. There is a lot. It's the burden on the medical system to continue caring for these patients is hefty, right? Most of these patients need help breathing. They obviously need 24-hour care to keep their needs met. But if that is a possibility, giving them their full chance is certainly what we should be doing.
So, I'm sorry, but we have maybe 10, 15 minutes left on the whole session. Just to make sure there's also, from an Islamic perspective, a decision like this cannot be based on just one person.
Right.
Usually in hospital, there's a consultant, a group of doctors make a decision like this to you. Do they have to be Muslims? The answer for this, I'm not very strict about have to be Muslims in United States, because the medical ethics that guard this area is very similar to what Muslims believe in.
Right.
But a person known to be an ethical person, you know, and if you want to consult a Muslim doctors, that wouldn't be a bad idea too, but it is sufficient in a country like ours here where there is by the vast majority, there is a level of ethical standard that is very, very similar to what we believe in as Muslim. I wouldn't say that in other countries that I have seen questions coming from them, from their physicians, you know, a group of Muslim physicians around the world that I'm part of them. I hear quite different, you know, sometimes of philosophy behind life and death. So that's something important to be. The issue of israf, is it israf or not? Quickly, what you have on those?
Israf in what way?
To maintain the person in hospital, spend all this money on the person.
If there's a potential that they
Well,
could recover.
again, if there's, I mean, going beyond the you know, what's expected, it will definitely be israf. If that person, there's no hope in them recovering, that is definitely wasted resources. Yes.
Yeah, for me, I'll tell you, if you can't offer it, you don't offer it. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Going into debts and a great deal of debts and $1 million, you know, just to go into that, you know what? That's not the best, you know, maybe decision to make. Debt is very serious matter with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if your debt against someone who's non-Muslims. It doesn't mean it's halal because my debtor is MD Anderson's, you know, or John, or, you know, still it's a debt. You will be asked about it on the Day of Judgment. So this is huquq, also it will affect your family and stuff like that. Is it worth it to put yes, is it somebody eligible for zakat to be giving, to be able to sustain life and to help someone if there is a good hope for recovery? Yes, you know, to take, absolutely. So you have, based on case by case, it will go. Dr. Tariq, تفضل. I think there is a microphone.
Since we're talking about hard decisions we make in our life, I think it's also very healthy if we also tackle the subject from the perspective of how we can belittle it, how we can reduce it, how we can make it easy. And instead of being reactive to the situation, if we have a good plan during the course of our life. What I mean by that, I will take just two things. Number one, if we raise our children in the Islamic way, so they understand the importance of going back to the scholar and ask him about something related to the end of life. That's number one. Number two also is al-wasiyah, the will. You have to have in your will something related to what's going to happen to you if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has tested you, and you know, you make your own decision based on your also understanding of Islam, or also in reference with a scholar of Islam. Living in America, I think we should not forget also that there are certain regulations we have to follow. For example, medical power of attorney. Medical power of attorney is a legal way of assigning a person who you trust. Maybe your sheikh, maybe your son, if he has good knowledge of Islam, maybe your daughter.
Very good point.
You know, to make a decision for you at that time, instead of being a chaos, and because I understand how difficult it is. And inshallah, hopefully next week, we choose a topic not depressive like that. Maybe we choose a topic how to build up a stronger community. Thank you so much.
Nice. Yes, we'll come to you. Just go ahead.
السلام عليكم جزاك الله خير وبارك فيك جميعا. يعني هو a few points بسرعة إنه quickly how to question the family and the patient, the family and the patient wife and son and daughters are very important. If the way to formulate the question is very important, because it's not about you, it's not about the spouse or the kids, it's about the patient. Ask him or ask them, what would you he or she for themselves, and if able to walk, if able to talk and discuss. And also, it's important to ask the spouse if this was discussed before. Did he mention anything about his wishes? Also, it's important to build the relationship with the family and understand their background. If the background, the guy, he is active, he's running marathons, he is going swimming, he's active person, it's not easy to give up on this type of patient. But if the patient is in the bed, he's watching TV, he's not active, he's very, simple guy, probably it's easier to push the family toward do not prolong suffering. The other thing is that don't mention...
Why?
Why? Because his functional status before that was low. He wasn't active. So basically any illness will be difficult for him to go back to active life or to functional life.
Okay.
The other thing is that, don't mention we are going to end his life. Of course,
very good point.
Everybody will say no. But say we're not going to prolong his suffering. We are not going to prolong mealless life.
Because that's what it is.
It is, exactly. We are not cheating the patient. The third point I want to mention is that I noticed that Muslim families are very difficult to deal with. I'm sorry to say that, but I think it's related to hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said, تداووا عباد الله فما خلق الله داء إلا وله دواء. But look, I will not give up on my dad because there is a dawa, there is cure. There is a medicine. And the Sheikh told me, don't give up on my dad. So it's very important for the community, medical community, and also the scholars to clarify this point to the patients and their families.
Yep.
جزاك الله خير.
Jazakallah khair. Very good. Yeah, but النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال there is a cure for every disease, but, except death. But also, some people know. Sometimes we know the cure, sometimes we don't. And you're gonna not keeping him hanging until it's discovered. Yes.
Assalamu alaikum.
So,
The many details that you are discussing here and that this brother just presented with respect to being informed of the death process with respect to American legalism and the ethics in medical ethics and so on. There's an organization that's international called the Death Cafe. And in the Death Cafe, you bring these issues, many of these details that you're trying to deal with, to common discussions. In other words, people in the community, no scholars, except maybe a scholar is there if he wants to be there. But these issues are discussed in detail with respect to how people are going through the grieving process and or who are facing death themselves. And it's called the Death Cafe. And because we are Muslims and we have Sharia and many other details to support us, I would encourage that a Death Cafe be started by this Jama'ah.
very good. Death Cafe. Okay. Anything from sister side? Anybody has a comment? Yes. Hold on, Jamaica. I will get you that. Can you give her the microphone? Just, yeah, so kind of online. Yeah, go give it to her. Jazakallah khair for being shy.
Assalamu alaikum. What is the stance on clinical trials, and would your answer be different for pediatrics, like for kids? Cancer.
Clinical trial.
Yeah.
A clinical trial is allowed in Islam. It is allowed because we have rules in Islam that maslahatul jama'a muqadda al maslahatul fard. The benefit for the collective is more prior to the individual. So because yes, that individual might suffer, might die, might not, but the benefit is for the collective, for the bigger picture. So it is allowed for a person to be part of a clinical trial. And it will not be sinful even if it causes death to the person.
Pediatric.
Yeah, but obviously, and you have to use your brain too. Like when you make choice like this, something trusted, something has a potential. Not every walkers somebody in middle of walk land want to make a clinical trials, have no any credential, and he said, let me make an experiment on you. It wouldn't be correct. Yeah.
Last question. Let's say you couldn't witness your family member, like say their shahada before they get into a coma or before something like that. Would it be appropriate to put them on life support for that because you want them to say the shahada or something?
You can say it, and hopefully they can hear it. Sometimes patient can hear, but you cannot respond. So that's also possible. So you can say to them, make dua for them. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam told us, upon death, angels are there. So say nothing but good, because angel say Ameen to what you say. So make dua for the person. I want to say also something about hard decision in general. Okay, any hard decision you have to make. Omar told me something very interesting in the car when I'm coming with him. He said to me, it has to be worth it. Hard decision, it means a long consequences, something that is so strong. So if this is a hard decision, it's really, we're talking general as a hard decision. So it has to be something that if you're going to make a very hard decision, make sure that this thing that you're going to make, Islamically correct, nothing wrong in it, morally acceptable, and you're going to make the decision, okay? It's a hard decision to rob a bank, but it's an easy decision to say no. So that's the point. Another point in a hard decision, make sure that you consult, you talk, don't keep it for yourself. It's so important to open up to friends, to family members, consult with someone, talk to the doctor, have a conversation. Hard decision, and don't think it is end by making the decision. I think you're still gonna need this consulting, this support, this therapy, after making the decision, so you don't feel that guilt on you after you make the hard decision. I think one of the points also for hard decision, then make sure that you pray istikhara. You turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before you make any big decision in your life. ما ندم من استشار وما ندم من استخار ولا خاب من استشار. You will never regret when you pray istikhara, and you will never also regret when you consult people. So make sure that you connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open your heart, to open your mind, to make the right decision. Allahumma hdini lima ikhtalafa min al-haqq bi-idhnik. Innaka tahdi man tasha ila sirat mustaqim. Allah is the hadi. Allah the one who guides. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the one who opened the heart and the mind of the person. So make sure you turn to Him so He make that process easy for you.
I would like to add the point on...
we'll give 1 minute for you, 1 for her, and we call it for tonight.
The point when you mentioned that some people say, well, we know when we're going to die, and there's no way we can have more life or less life, or more time added or less time taken away because of the way we live. And that is actually a misunderstanding of the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala determined how much or how long you're going to live and what type of life you're going to live. But we also know that if this is the qadr, you don't know actually what the qadr is. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us that اعملوا فكل ميسر لما خلق له, that you do the work as you will work towards that goal that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prescribed for you or has set for you. In this case, what do you choose? Do you choose to live a happy life or a miserable life? Do you choose to live a longer life or a shorter life? So if you choose to live a shorter life, then you're going to be actually living the life of someone who's actually dying or wants to die or, like abusing himself. And that goes with, when we talk about hard decisions, you need to actually rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do the work that makes Allah's answer to your reliance in your favor. So if you have a hard decision to make, a lot of people, for example, regretted, they were really dreading divorce, for example. But when they actually asked Allah for help and then they ended up making that decision, Allah improved upon their life after that. It wasn't the end of your life. It wasn't the end of any, you have to have faith in Allah and trust in Allah with that hard decision you're going to make. And after all, you need to base your whole life and the purpose of your life and the happiness of your life on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. Not on a person, not on a thing, not on a circumstance, not on a condition that you are in, but rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and ask Him to improve it for you. And it will make it easy for you. That hard decision becomes easy.
I think the only thing to add is that Sheikh Ibrahim had alluded to the idea of the dignity of a human being, and just to keep that in mind when we're taking our medical treatments and seeking them and administering them as physicians, that there is an inherent dignity, right, in the human race. And so many times giving a person that treatment, taking that treatment enhances it, and occasionally foregoing, whatever medical intervention enhances that dignity. And so just kind of keeping that in mind, I think, is important.
Any advice in regard to this area in particular? A lot of people hang on to delusion. Oh, I read in WhatsApp there is somebody took that herbs and Allah cured them from the cancer.
The copper bracelet.
Sister Saad from Morocco, she tried this Madri and she now, mashallah, active in her country. And you look for Sister Saad, there is no Saad or Layla or anybody like that. Can you say something about that? I'm sure you've seen those.
This actually just came up on one of my physician forums that an older physician woman, she's a grandmother, she was taking care of her 1-year-old granddaughter, and when she went to change her clothes, she took off her socks and she found potato peels inside her socks because the child has a cold, and her parents had read online that if you put potato peels in the sock, it'll dry out the fever and dry out the illness, and the child will recover faster. No. And so people were talking about this, right? And apparently it's tradition in a lot of cultures. And so for me personally, and I think the overwhelming response to the potato peel story was, if it's not harming the person, don't take it away. Let them have, nice. Maybe their hope in whatever they're using. But many times, right, we have patients in the hospital, I drink this protein shake every day, can I take it here? Or this is the vitamin complex I take every day, can I take it here? And so we look over it. If it's gonna interact negatively with their medications, then we'll say no. But if not, let them continue what they were doing if it's not harming them. So no, if it's
nice.
not, yeah.
Well said. Thank you very much. Jazakumullah khair. SubhanAllah, I had another topic close to this, but if your parents are old, would you ever consider put them in an elderly home where they live and somebody take care of them? That's a sensitive topic. Very, very sensitive, because it has to do with culture, with religion, with reality, and I would love to see the discussion between, us at one day, but not next week, because next week we're gonna keep something. We had also divorce, a hard decision to make, cutting relationship with family member, a hard decision to make with friends. These are very good discussion, but we'll keep it next week. We have chai and pie. Yes. Next week you have a competition, the best chai and the best pie that can be made in house here. Okay, so we have a short one, fun one, then we will have a competition over chai and pie. People eat turkey in the morning, I guess, or the afternoon or whatever, on Thursday, but on Friday here, inshallah, we'll have that pie and chai. So get ready for it. Looking forward for next week, inshallah ta'ala. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving and a wonderful week with your family. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for being with us tonight.